Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honorable Stephen Dickson, FAA Administrator and ATCA President, and CEO Peter F. Dumont.
So good morning. Welcome to day 2. And I'm here with the Honorable Steve Dickson, the FAA Administrator, as you just heard. Steve's agreed to sit down with us for a while and discuss a few things. We'll be using Slido like we usually do, so if you have audience questions, please use the Slido app and we'll address them as we can. So let's start with a basic question. You and I have spoken. You weren't looking for a job. You did a great job over at Delta and probably wanted some rest and relaxation. Why'd you take the job?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
And a lot of familiar faces in the crowd here, and it's an honor to be here with you. In fact, I didn't realize I had a choice when you asked.
Good.
But in any case, as you said, had a really great career in the military and at Delta, and I had been in my position leading flight operations for a number of years, the last 12 years of my career, flying the line and leading our global operations, and had been through a lot of success with the company. Started out in a situation where the company was in bankruptcy and worked as part of the operations and the senior leadership team to really build it up into a very successful enterprise. And I was really proud of that. But you reach a point where you need to think about how much you can contribute going forward and the hard work that we had put into building a very strong bench. And in order for them to be successful, it really was going to put people in positions where they could have opportunity, and they didn't know it, but they were ready to take on those leadership positions. So it was time for me to step down. And as you said, I wasn't looking for a job. But the Secretary Chow, asked me if I was interested in the FAA, and it's not something that you aspire to, but it was certainly I've had the opportunity over the years to work with some great people at the agency and felt like I could make a difference. And it was also exciting to contemplate the prospect of serving my country. So that's why I'm here.
Okay. And you've had a lot of experience working with the ATM industry with Task Force 5, which we work together on, and the NAC, which we work together on as well. So I know you have a deep understanding of ATM, the FAA, from a pilot's perspective as well, which is very important. What are your priorities? We discussed your priorities, and you told me how you got to them and how you arrived. Maybe share that with them.
Sure. Well, I think it's really important. Obviously, the first priority of the agency is safety, both as an operator and also as a regulator. So, and the current situation that we're facing, there's some important work that needs to be done in the aircraft certification area, and getting the 737 MAX, flying again, and making sure that it's a safe aircraft. And I know we'll talk probably more about that here in the next few minutes. But that's got to absolutely be our first priority. Secondly, stakeholder engagement is very important to me. Events like this where we can come together and talk about how we can move the system forward, how we can collaborate more effectively. But I've also got major stakeholders on Capitol Hill, the American public, the other federal agencies, state and local governments, and counterparts, ANSPs, and regulators around the world. And that really leads to the next point, which is global leadership. There's no aviation agency that's done more to promote aviation safety globally over the decades than the FAA. And we still are, I think, setting the pace internationally, but we need to do it from a position of humility and inclusiveness. I think that's what we're doing. It's certainly what I intend to keep doing going forward. And the fourth priority really is a fairly broad category, but it includes a lot around the organization and around workforce, and that's people. And we need to give people opportunities. We need to give them opportunities both within the agency and also promote aviation careers within the private sector. And that's really important to me, and I think it's going to be one of the most significant challenges, but also opportunities for the agency going forward.
Okay. So you established your priorities. You spoke with the secretary. You established your priorities, told her about your priorities. So, as we all know, we set priorities, we have a to-do list, and then the day happens, and sometimes you don't get to those priorities.
Right.
How is what you're doing and required to do, how does that correspond to your priorities? Are you able to meet your priorities every day, or do you see yourself doing some things that maybe take you away from your priorities sometimes?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think any large organization that has a day-to-day, 24/7, 365 operation has trouble maintaining a strategic focus and moving forward and getting things accomplished in accordance with the plan that
Right.
you set out. So that's a continual battle, and that doesn't matter whether you're in an airline or running the ATO or running the FAA, the Department of Transportation. There are things that happen, and you have to get comfortable with your to-do list, your list of priorities getting constantly reordered, but not letting things drop off. And so it is important that we come together. I think venues like this, like ATCA, are very helpful to go back and make sure we're strategically set and charting the course that we need to be proceeding on. In terms of the, my first 70 days or so far, obviously a lot of the focus has been on aviation safety and aircraft certification of the 73 MAX. And that's important. I mean, it's important to our country. It's important to the global commercial aviation industry. So I embrace that challenge, but we can't let it distract us. We've still got to find the bandwidth to be able to accomplish and move forward on the other areas that need to be working on.
Okay, now I want to ask you about something about stakeholder engagement and global leadership. So stakeholder engagement, I saw something you do called Straight from Steve. Thanks for the shout out, by the way.
Absolutely.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about Straight from Steve and what you hope to accomplish with it, and what was the driving force behind doing it, and what is it?
Sure. Well, it's multifaceted, as you would imagine, but relatively simple. And it really starts out as a way for us to make sure that at the FAA that we're all on the same page, and that there are a lot of really cool things going on around the agency that I'm constantly learning about, and I'm sure I'll be learning throughout my tenure. I mean, learning from a lot of you in this room, and those around the entire industry. So, in many ways, it's an exciting, probably the most exciting period that we've seen in aviation in decades, maybe ever. When you think about a lot of the new technologies and new ways of doing things that are coming to the fore. So Straight from Steve really was designed to make sure, as a leader, that I was visible to the workforce, and that there's also a vehicle for folks to learn about what's going on around the agency and all the great work that's happening. Because in any technical organization, whether it's an airline or an MRO or a manufacturer or the FAA, technical people tend to get focused within their discipline, and it's great to have that technical subject matter expertise, but it's also very important that we have a broad perspective, because the FAA isn't going to be successful if one line of business is successful by itself.
Right.
We've got to be successful as an enterprise.
Absolutely.
And Straight from Steve is a vehicle to help make sure that that we don't have too many bureaucratic layers, and that we're really looking at issues from an enterprise perspective.
And this is a video series, goes out weekly, and it's
Right.
all employees? All FAA?
Yes, yeah, all employees. It's designed to be, just a couple of minutes.
Uh-huh.
And it's a little bit about what I'm doing that particular week. I've recently started interviewing leaders from within different lines of business within the FAA. This past week I interviewed Wayne Monteith, who runs our commercial space line of business. And we'll keep doing that. We're going to talk a lot about UAS. We're going to talk a lot about what's going on in the ATO, of course, and so that everyone around the agency understands how we all work together more effectively.
I think that's great to get a full picture of what's going on in the agency
Absolutely.
instead of getting focused on your day-to-day. That's fantastic. So you've been traveling a lot. I saw you at NACA CFS, Communicating for Safety.
Right.
Great event. Very well done. Young, gone, go. You were at ATCA, and then you did an FAA executive retreat. So let's go to global leadership for a minute. When you were at ATCA, you brought together 50, is that right?
Yes.
Executives from around the world to discuss the Boeing 737 MAX. So I see that as global leadership, taking a stand and starting to talk about what needs to be talked about. How'd that go? Tell us a little bit.
It went very well, and our international engagement has continued to be very effective, I think, and it's something that we absolutely need to keep doing. What has happened through this process, and let me say at the outset that the accidents in Indonesia and Ethiopia should not have happened. And you don't want to have an accident to put improvements in place into the regulatory structure or in the way that we oversee aviation safety, in the way that all stakeholders execute. You want to be proactive. You want to be predictive if you can. But when something like this happens, we owe it to the traveling public, we owe it to our industry, and we owe it to the victims and their families, frankly, to learn the appropriate lessons and to make sure that we put improvements in place so nothing like this ever happens again. And it's an interesting scenario because we're not just talking about a machine. When we had this problem with the 787 a few years ago, that was about a component on the machine that was malfunctioning that the pilots had no control over. These accidents really get into the interface between the operator and the human and the machine itself. So there's an opportunity here to really look at things like human factors and aircraft design in a much more holistic way than anyone around the world has ever done before. So the good news about this process is that it's brought everyone together, and everyone is learning from this. The recommendations that have come in so far are going to help raise the bar for aircraft certification around the world. I think that's really a good thing.
And how about, was it received well? Was the briefing received well?
Yes, yes, and there's very good, solid technical alignment at the working level. We're sharing data and information around all the regulatory agencies, including the four states of design, ourselves, EASA, the Brazilians and the Canadians, and then we've also involved, again, these broader regulators where the airplane may be operating, and where you'll have operators operating on it.
Okay, great. You were going to fly the MAX sim. Have you done that?
I have flown it, yes.
Yeah.
I've flown it in a normal scenario to test out or to satisfy myself with the handling qualities, both with the MCAS off, with the old version, and with the newer functionality. And I'll also fly the airplane before I sign off on it.
Doing pilot stuff.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. You talked a little bit about the new users coming into the airspace and into the system. We had a question yesterday when we were up on the stage. We were talking about Blue Skies Initiative, which you and I spoke a little bit about in private. And it asked if the FAA could keep pace with the technology. Could we keep pace with the rules, regulations, actually integrating them into the airspace system? My first response was, it took us all by surprise. We're all having trouble keeping pace. Do you think the FAA can keep pace? Do you think we can get these technological and new users into the airspace integrated?
We absolutely have to. I mean, we don't have any choice.
Right.
In fact, I want us to be ahead of the pace of change. That's going to be that's a tall order, but we have to do it. I think one of the things that we have to do in this area is make sure that we've got solid stakeholder engagement with our other federal partners. as well, and state and local, because there are many policy issues beyond aviation safety when we get into some of the new entrants that we need to make sure all of those interests are accounted for as we move forward.
Right, because we're going to have to look at performance-based regulations,
right,
those types of things, airspace usage, or to segregate airspace. Well, we do segregate airspace, don't we, by classification and avionics capability?
We do, but our approach on, for example, UAS and even on commercial space has been to more fluidly integrate those operations, and that's a lot more difficult. That's several orders of magnitude more difficult, but it's really with the diversity of our airspace in the U.S., it's really the only path forward to have a truly integrated system that has the level of flexibility and combined with safety that we really want to have.
Right. Commercial space, the Commercial Space Day, we did that with the FAA, ATCA did. And one of the things we noticed, we keep talking about new entrants from their point of view. They don't understand the airspace. They need to understand this. And what we found out through dialogue, which I think we need to have more dialogue, is that the existing users of the airspace also have to understand the motivation, the capabilities, the challenges for new entrants. They seem to be not talking to each other as much as they should and exchanging information. One thinks they own the airspace, the other thinks they should own the airspace. That's a problem. I think we need more venues like this to talk about those things.
Absolutely, because we need to be able to understand each other, and certainly, all wisdom doesn't emanate from FAA headquarters.
Right.
It doesn't emanate from from the airline industry. It doesn't emanate from new entrants. It doesn't emanate from legacy aviation interests. But on the other hand, we have, over the decades, developed an extremely reliable and diverse and safe system. We all want to have the new entrants integrated into that system effectively. But if we had the same type of approach now as we had back in 1903, the Wright brothers never would have taken off.
Exactly.
So we've got to figure out how to balance those interests.
Right.
And that requires dialogue and some tough decisions. It requires leadership.
And when you say the FAA doesn't, isn't the all-knowing, that's a collaborative spirit. I mean, I see the FAA and the government going more to collaboration with industry to look for expertise and look for ways to doing things better. Do you see the FAA? Let's talk about the Office of Innovation that's not mandated, but discussed at length in the reauthorization bill.
Right.
Where are we at on that?
So
a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, we do have, we are setting up the innovation office, and I think that we need to have a mechanism to be able to bring in new ideas and operationalize them without the need for years and years and years of research and development. I mean, research and development plays a role. And we have ways that we can bring those ideas and those concepts into reality. Obviously, we've done a lot of work with NASA over the years and have brought a lot of tools into the ATC system from those efforts. But the Innovation Office really gives us the opportunity for an incubator to bring new ideas in and maybe some off-the-shelf technologies and bring them in and innovate much more in a much more agile way. I've seen it work in the private sector,
right?
And I don't see any reason why it can't work in the agency.
I agree. Got to change hearts and minds too, though.
Absolutely.
Right. From the audience, please tell us more about the plans we're hearing to reorganize the FAA and when. I've heard this too, but I've heard so many different versions, and we are or we're not.
Well, I think I'm not going to announce an FAA, a reorganization of the agency.
Of course not.
So I want to set those expectations. But I do think, you always, as a new leader, it's always interesting to come in and give one, okay, well, what's he going to do? And how's he going to move the reporting structures around or move the boxes around? I think there are some general principles that I'm interested in. The first one is taking layers out of the organization. We want to make sure that we are responsive to our folks on the front line, and that we don't have too many reporting layers and requirements for reports and paperwork to run up, run up through the chain. And so we're going to look for opportunities. That my sense is it varies around between lines of business. I think the second point is you talk about stovepipes, and if a neighbor asks someone at the FAA, where they work, or they say, well, I work for the FAA, or do they say I work for commercial space or the air traffic organization or something like that. We need to be looking at ourselves from the agency perspective and how we can help each other be successful. And technical people tend to want to matriculate within their discipline and may not have the perspective of the broader perspective around the agency. So we'll be thoughtfully developing folks. And again, some of this is happening now, but asking them to move into other disciplines so that we can have an enterprise perspective. So there'll be some of that going on as well. And we've also got to take a look at spans of control and reporting structures. So those are the general things that I'm looking at, but I wouldn't plan on any wholesale change at the agency at this point.
And from that perspective, that's a very business-minded, entrepreneurial perspective of how to run the agency. And like you said, you're 70 days in, and a good leader doesn't just come in to change things for the sake of changing things, which is exactly what you're saying. You're taking a look at what's going on, figuring out where you want to get to, how to best get there, and make it as agile as possible.
Well, I think one of the things that I'm seeing is the FAA has a lot of data, but the data has been developed, the standards and the systems have been developed at certain periods of time to solve a certain problem.
Right.
And these various databases, in many cases, do not talk to each other. And so you have something like the ATCA program, for example, for air traffic controllers, doesn't seem to have an exchange of data with the SIs. They're both looking at things that are happening in the air traffic control system, but I can't do a query that's integrated between those two systems. And the FAA isn't the only organization that has these issues. Again, you see them at airlines and in the private sector as well. But I think that although this is not an organizational issue per se, part of what contributes to stovepiping are these different data structures that we have. And I think over the next several years, one of the things that I'll want to do is look at some ways to bring our safety data and our organizational data together in a more holistic way. In fact, I had a chance to attend the last commercial aviation safety team meeting, and that was one of the things I talked to them about. And it seems like there's a pretty broad industry alignment.
Mm-hmm. Are you going to speak to the unmanned aircraft safety team as well?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and we've got several of those industry stakeholder groups that I'm real interested in helping to mature them and bring them along.
That's great, because I think they are on that. We're trying to fashion ourselves after the past, because that's a great model.
Right.
And we look forward to helping in that regard. The NAC. When we worked together on the NAC, you were very active participant and very passionate about where we needed to go. How do you see your role now in the NAC as we move forward? Will we see you there a lot? Will you be participating?
You'll see me at the NAC. I don't know that I'm going to take on the DFO role. Dan and I are still negotiating that. By the way, Dan's done a great job of recognizing him tonight. I just want to acknowledge his leadership and stewardship of the FAA during these last couple of years. He is a close friend and colleague, and have really enjoyed working with him. Look forward to continuing to do some great things. But the NAC itself, yes, you will see me there, and I am obviously very interested in helping to move things forward. We're at a point where depending on how you do the calculation, probably 70–75% of the core technologies for next gen have been deployed, but we've got to operationalize.
Operationalize.
We've got to integrate the systems more effectively, and we've got to operational. We've got to change the operation essentially. So I think there's some opportunities to do that. We are facing some challenges. We're facing significant challenges with noise, as we know. Obviously, funding is always a perennial issue, and we've got to again manage the changes to the operation and make sure that we're proceeding along the path that we need to proceed along. The other thing is we talked about new entrants. Some of these possibilities did not exist 10 years ago. They weren't even imaginable. You would be talking about 400,000 commercially certified small drones out there, and we would be talking about the kinds of launch cadence that we're seeing in commercial space.
And recovery gates.
Exactly. So there's the situation has changed, and we need to have a system that's flexible enough to be able to accommodate that change. So my focus is going to be on operations, metrics, and making sure that the FAA is speaking the same language as the industry. The other challenge that I think we have at the larger airports is we've got some long overdue capital projects that are being undertaken. I had the opportunity to, in my first couple of weeks, to be up at LaGuardia, and it is if you look at it, it looks like a mess right now. But it's the way the Port Authority described it is it's like you're doing open heart surgery on an 80-year-old marathon runner during a race. So, and we've got big projects going on. Denver was out there a few weeks ago. They're adding 39 gates. They're looking at building another runway. We've seen projects in Los Angeles, the terminal move in Los Angeles, adding some gates there. The other New York airports. So there's about $30 or $40 billion worth of physical capital projects going on in the midst of the modernization that's happening within the airspace itself, and that's impacting performance because it's creating constraints on the ground.
Right.
And so we've got to navigate through that as well.
Okay. It's kind of a general question from the audience. What are your thoughts on air traffic controller hiring policy?
Well, we need to have the best and the brightest. So that's that is we need to. I was up at Vaughn College again when I was at LaGuardia. We need to make sure that we're out there having bringing the next generation on board, and that young people see the opportunities out there. My understanding, our hiring numbers have been in a fairly good place the last couple of years, but what we are seeing is that we've got a lot of training going on in the facilities, and we need to continue to move that forward so that we get the number of operation controllers fully qualified up to the complement where it needs to be.
Okay. And if you look at the big picture of FAA, so let's talk about engineers and those other parts of the FAA. What are you doing to try to retain those?
Well, a lot around workforce. I think several things. We've got to look at providing people, again, opportunities that make their jobs not only technically satisfying, but satisfying from a career perspective.
Right.
We need systems engineers, frankly. In the aircraft cert area, there's a lot of talk about, the FAA doesn't have enough engineering expertise to be able to keep up with the technical demands that are required. But remember, we don't build airplanes. We have to be able to certify and be able to oversee the certification process. So we don't necessarily in every case require the same exact type of engineering skills. We've traditionally sourced engineers, pilots, inspectors from those who may have had a similar type of background from the private sector, but I think we can think about some of these disciplines a little more holistically. What we need are people with critical thinking skills and, in the engineering sense, the ability to be able to understand how things fit together and how the system needs to work and where there's interdependencies.
That's an interesting concept. Instead of just we're focused on this one particular engineering task.
Right.
And we saw that, we do a technical symposium up at New Jersey every year, and we work with the FAA, and we get all the engineers out and they display what they're doing. In the first few years, we recognized that we were walking around and going, well, that sounds very similar to this. You two work together, and we found out they didn't.
Right.
And they didn't have an understanding of how what they were doing actually led to the whole solution of the problem. We found the more they talked to each other, the things you're doing with, straight from Steve and the communications things that you're doing, with the workforce would definitely lend itself to giving you a better end product, a holistic approach to solving the problems instead of the tasks.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to talk about it, Pete, is that we still certainly want to have that core expertise, but it may over time be more effective for us to reshape that workforce just a bit, and that'll allow us to bring in some new thinking and with more of a focus on data. And you see the same things happening at the airlines, frankly, where what was good enough 20 or 25 years ago in a traditional aviation career is not going to be good enough going forward, because there's a lot of new challenges that we have to be able to address.
Right. Interesting. So speaking of priorities, where is UTM and UAS integration in your plans? I guess as far as priorities.
Well, I mean, it's I think that we talked about safety, right? But we have to figure out how to logically and without taking years and years to do it, how do we integrate these new systems into a very mature and well-performing air traffic control system? And if we aren't moving forward briskly and keeping everyone involved, I'll use a fighter pilot lingo here, but keeping everybody in formation, we're going to get off on tangents that just aren't going to be helpful. And so, the FAA is responsible for controlled airspace, but we need to recognize there are local interests that have to be accounted for. And we don't want to end up in a situation where we're not moving quickly enough so that we're overcome by the desire to have more of a patchwork type of system out there. So that's where I think where UTM is going to be very helpful and very important, and the overall integration strategy is going to be very important as well. Remote ID is the next big thing. The rule did not get out there for public comment as quickly as we wanted, but on the other hand, I think that again, some of the other stakeholder interests, we really need to make sure that all that's incorporated. We've got a good solid approach before we go out to the comment period, and then we'll be in a much better place. I do think, I know Jay Merkel I think he's been a very effective and innovative leader here, and I want to support him and make sure that we continue to move forward together on all things UAS.
And he came from the ATL, so he has that understanding of how the ATL works and how these two things need to work together. Personally, I think integrating UAS into the airspace is the most difficult platform we've tried to integrate ever. We designed the airspace for pilots in the aircraft, not for pilots outside the aircraft.
Right.
And you hear a lot of criticisms about it's moving too slowly. However, I think we've learned from history that if you move too quickly in aviation, you fail catastrophically.
Well, and you don't want to end up with something that's half-baked, and then you have to go back to the drawing board, or operators have to re-equip, those types of things. So ultimately, it's kind of going slow to go fast is not really the right way to say it, but making sure that we are keeping everyone informed and engaged as we go along is going to be critically important, and I think it's been successful so far. Okay. But we are at an inflection point here where, we're going to rapidly be overcome by events if we don't keep moving forward along the flight plan.
Right, there are a lot of technological advancements, a lot of user cases, a lot of good ideas out there. But again, like we discussed before, you have to be goal-oriented, not task-oriented.
Right.
Just approve this, hope it all works together.
Right.
Yeah, good.
Absolutely.
All right. Not really sure what that question means. Given the safety of life mission and much end-of-life technology, how can the FAA permit proven technology in with reasonable risk assessment? Do you understand that question?
I'm not sure. It sounds like the question is, looking at our mission to be the gold standard essentially, and as an operator in the air traffic system, how can we permit proven technology with a reasonable risk assessment? Okay, so this may be around the 737 MAX. I'm not sure if that's the
You
question.
want to talk a little bit about that for a minute?
So yeah, I'll be happy to.
Where are we?
Well, we are essentially, as I've said many times, the airplane's not going to fly until I'm satisfied that it's the safest thing out there. And if you look at the tens of thousands of man hours and the number of engineers and PhDs and pilots that have looked at this airplane, it will have undergone more scrutiny than any machine out there flying today, probably anything in history. So we are at the point where we've got the complete system description from the manufacturer, and we have gone through we've got the final software load. Actually, are using the software, the aircraft production software in the engineering simulator. And the next step is to undergo the workload management and human factors testing, and then have the U.S. and international pilots go through the scenarios to determine what the training requirements will be before the airplane is the design's approved. So it's going to be quite several more weeks before we go through all of that part of the process. But once we get to that point, then it's a fairly straightforward process to unground the airplane at that point. But again, we've got considerable work to do to get there. And as far as the certification process going forward, as we said before, we have a group that's several different groups looking at it. With respect to the ungrounding of the MAX, we've got the Technical Advisory Board, and it is running side by side, but it's a separate process from our own aircraft certification process. So we've got NASA, Volpe, and others, some from the FAA involved with that, but it's not the same participants. And there are over 650, I believe, separate items in the integrated system safety assessment that are being addressed as part of the essentially the recertification of the entire flight control system, not just the MCAS. So a good bit of redundancy and robustness being added to it. As we move forward, we've had the Joint Authorities Technical Review. We've got the Special Committee and IG investigation and congressional investigations as well. All of these groups will inform where the certification process needs to move in the future. And so far we see three themes coming out that I think will be addressed as we refine the process. The first one is a more holistic approach versus a transactional approach to aircraft certification. And again, these are not just issues within the U.S., they're really around the world. And so that's the first one. The second one is a more integrated approach to human factors as a part of the design. As long as we have humans flying airplanes and operating the system, we really can't. You can never completely engineer out human error, and you want to leverage human decision making. In order to do that in this day and age, we can't look at the pilot in this case as an adjunct to the machine. In other words, design the machine and then train the pilot how to operate it.
Right.
We've actually got to have human factors be part of the process, even in the design of the system. And it's not that that hasn't been happening before with all the manufacturers, but it is something that we can do in a much more effective way going forward. And we need to take a look at our own capabilities in that area. And then finally, there are some bureaucratic and some process aspects between the regulator and the manufacturer that can be made more efficient, and in terms of how information is passed and at what point the information is provided during the certification process, to make sure that we don't have fragmented communications, that everybody's on the same page through every step of the way of the process.
Okay. You said something in the middle of that I started thinking about ATM, and we talked about collaboration with outside entities and industry. We didn't really talk about collaboration with government. You mentioned NASA. So when we talk about UTM, when we talk about new entrants, NASA's very involved in that. They have a lot of capabilities to provide tech transfer to the FAA. Do you see that continuing?
Absolutely.
Becoming more robust?
Absolutely, yes. NASA, anywhere where I can, leverage any capabilities,
right.
I want to bring that into the agency and allow us to move forward more effectively, more quickly.
And I'm certainly not saying that the FAA doesn't have a lot of capability. I mean, the technical center is a gem.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, they really are. This is about program managers and contracting officers, and I think what it says is aren't incentivized to operate differently by looking at commercial markets for solutions. Do you encourage them to operate differently?
Well, this is a good example of an area that I need to become more familiar with.
Right.
Because certainly incentives are really important. Are we set up to incentivize our teams to do things the way they've already done because it's a safe place to be, or are there ways to integrate in a more agile way and innovate more effectively? So I'm absolutely interested in making sure that those incentives are lined up to where they need to be.
Okay. We actually, a couple of years ago, brought some stakeholders together to discuss just this issue and provided a non-attributable white paper on this. I'll be glad to share.
Sure, absolutely.
Sure. And where are we at? Well, we're out of time here. Sorry. But thank you very much, Steve, for being here with me today and with us. And we appreciate your insights. And I'll take you around the hall for a while and let you see what some of the exhibitors have and some of the capabilities that we might be using and might use in the future.
Well, thanks, Pete.
Great.
Again, I look forward to working with everybody and appreciate your hospitality. This is always a great event. And, just look forward to making a difference.
Look forward to working with you.
Thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.